Chapter 17. The Final Warning. He awakened from his sleep. What a horrible nightmare. He had tossed and turned the entire night, unable to sleep or ease his mind from what he was expected to do. Realizing that sleep was the farthest thing from his mind, he took a walk around town to contemplate the situation. Was he insane? He couldn't stop worrying and wondering about her condition. It was 3 a.m. The streets were dark, and he felt so lonely. There was so much he needed to get off his chest. He knew if he did not do it soon, he would not be able to rest. He spotted a bench, so he decided to relax in order to ease the pain and tension that caused him so much stress. As he thought of her, his eyes filled with tears. The hurt he felt was so unbearable that his throat started to hurt. He closed his eyes and rested his head on his knees and embraced himself. He first met her when he was a teenager. It seemed just like yesterday. They had a biology class together. She had so much innocence and natural beauty. He recalled that he couldn't take his eyes off her. He was completely enthralled by her beauty. Yes, she was most definitely beautiful on the outside, but her inner beauty caused her to shine. She was polite and well-mannered and had a peaceful spirit. Sometimes she acknowledged him and threw up her petite hand to wave, followed by a beautiful smile. He wanted to approach her, and finally, he received the invitation. This was the beginning of a beautiful relationship. On their first date, they went swing dancing. They were both horrible dancers, but it was fun just attempting to follow the difficult moves. Finally, they were able to master one simple move, which they repeated over and over again. As he held her hands, her warm hands began to shake. So he looked her in the eyes and smiled. He wanted her to know that she could trust him and did not have to fear. He could tell that her heart had been broken before. Behind her smile and bright eyes were insecurities, fear, and uncertainty. He squeezed her hand tightly for reassurance as he spun her around and around. She came out of her shell and began to giggle uncontrollably. She was like a caterpillar in a cocoon who became a beautiful butterfly as she danced freely and unashamed. He held her hands as he escorted her off the dance floor. He bought some soda pop, and they sat around a table in the corner of the room. At last, he had a chance to have a conversation with the girl of his dreams. He didn't say much. He just listened and gave her his undivided attention. She began to share the painful memories of her past. She said she'd been through so many painful relationships that never seemed to last. Her heart had been broken. Therefore, she felt it was impossible to ever love again. She confidently proclaimed as she tilted her head to the side,
"The next guy I love has to be trustworthy and sincere."
All of a sudden, sadness filled her eyes as she began to share about her childhood and all the horrible things that had happened to her. Unexpectedly, she scooted her chair away from him. She began to whisper. He could barely hear her. The music in the club seemed to get louder as her voice and confidence seemed to fade away. He whispered, "I can barely hear you, my dear. Come closer." She scooted a little closer, but was still too far, so he assisted her by gently scooting her chair a little closer to his. He could tell she was nervous as she continued on, so he decided to comfort her as he uttered, "It's all right. You don't have to share at this moment." He escorted her on the floor for one final dance. She danced passionately and freely as she confidently gazed into his eyes. He thoroughly enjoyed himself, but was exhausted, so he called it a night. Nevertheless, she grasped his hands and politely asked for more of his time. He was surprised by her response, but willingly obliged as he spun her around the dance floor one final time. They laughed and joked on the way home. Their date came to an end as he pulled into her driveway. He walked speedily to the passenger side of the car to open the door for her. She shyly smiled as he held her hand and walked her to the door. She gave him a warm embrace as her face began to glow. She thanked him for the date and said she had a great time. He left, confidently assured that their relationship would blossom in just a matter of time. He could not help but feel privileged that she'd opened up and given him her heart, although she barely knew him. Indeed, something beautiful was sure to occur. The next day, she acted aloof and was distant as he tried to get her attention. She gave him a half-hearted hello. He tried to make eye contact, but she started talking with some of her peers. Later on that day, as he was walking down the hallway, he had a feeling that he was being watched. He slowly turned, and it was her. He began to beckon for her, but she put her head down and speedily walked into the ladies' room. He could not understand what had brought about the sudden change. He talked to a close friend about the situation over the phone. He was deeply hurt and confused by her actions, so much so that the love he had for her was starting to turn into bitterness. His friend was wise and gave him great counsel. He explained that she really liked him, but was too afraid to show him. He listened to the advice of his friend and decided to give her a call in order to break the silence that had separated them. She answered on the first ring, and he began to pour out his heart to her and share his hurt and grief from her rejection. He confessed his love for her. She apologized for her actions and assured him it wasn't anything he had done. It was all her. She admitted her aloofness and felt she needed to draw the line. There was a moment of silence. He mustered up the courage to ask, "Is there someone else?" She cut in.
No, I'm just not ready for a relationship.
As time went on, they graduated from high school and ended up attending the same college. They were surprised to see each other the beginning of freshman year. They both laughed at the coincidence that landed them at the same out-of-state school. It was a prestigious university that offered a superb education. She exclaimed that she had received a scholarship and felt college was a time for new beginnings. She had high expectations. He realized in seeing her that all these years he had lied to himself when he said he no longer had feelings for her. Without a doubt, his love had only grown stronger for her. But he did not want to love her because loving her caused so much hurt. He reasoned that maybe fate brought them together. After all, they were young when he first pursued her. He was just about to ask her if she'd like to have some coffee when a handsome young man took her hand and kissed her on the cheek. She introduced him as her boyfriend and then patted him on the shoulder, saying,
It was good seeing you again. I hope all is well for you.
They never spoke much after that day. Every once in a while, in passing, she would wave and ask how his classes were coming along. He noticed that she began to change and seemed to be caught up in her appearance and how others perceived her. Her style of dress was completely different. She wore halter tops with short skirts and always seemed to giggle and was flirtatious. Many guys were drawn to her sex appeal. Every semester that passed, she seemed to be on the arm of a new guy. Why couldn't he move on? It was as though his soul was knit to hers. He still remembered the dance. He saw so much potential in her and wondered why she never gave him a chance. His senior year had come to an end, and he was excited about completing all of his exams. He was so relieved that the semester was over. He knew he had aced all his tests. Then he saw her, sitting on the bench all alone and sobbing uncontrollably. His heart bled for her pain. He was moved with compassion and slowly approached to ask if she'd mind if he joined her.
She cried, Yes. Between several sobs and deep breaths, she bawled, I feel so miserable. I know I will not graduate on time. My grades have dropped. There's no way I'll graduate with honors. I should have taken school more seriously. My boyfriend called it quits. He doesn't want to have anything to do with me anymore. What did I do? I gave him my heart, and he ripped it into pieces. I know my reputation is not the best around this campus. To be honest, there were times I was so drunk that I'd wake up in a strange room naked with several guys lying around me. I have behaved foolishly, and I'm so ashamed of the person I have become. I don't know how to change. My boyfriend has broken off our engagement. He said he couldn't marry me because I wasn't a virgin. Yet he never expressed this when he caressed me and made passionate love to me every night. I feel like a fool. What do I have to give? I am so messed up. Why can't he love me? Why can't he marry me? He said the first time we were intimate was when he initially lost respect for me. He thought I was different. He said he wanted me to stop him and say no. He wanted to respect me. He said he couldn't respect me as a spouse if I was easy to let him in. I couldn't be trusted in a long-term commitment.
She wept bitterly. It seemed like her sobbing would never come to an end. He listened intently and could feel her plight. He didn't interrupt her because he knew she needed to release her pain. He put his arm around her shoulder and assured her that a better day was coming.
She shyly looked him in his eyes, and then her crying ceased. Then, putting her hands over her face, she said, "I have treated you badly. All you've ever tried to do was love me, and I have rejected you time and time again. I am so sorry. I am so ashamed. I guess I'm getting what I deserve."
He gently pulled her hands from her face. "I still love you, and I always will. I can never stop loving you, and I'm not ashamed of you."
She wept. "But I can't forgive myself. How can I love you when I can't love myself?" He tried to embrace her, but she stood to her feet, pushed him away, and ran screaming, "Stop doing this to me. I can't love you. I can't."
He sat on the bench with his heart once again shattered. He realized that she still was not ready. He wept and said a prayer on her behalf. He still had not given up on her. He remembered the old saying and took it to heart as he whispered, "The pain that accompanies love is an agony worth knowing." He never thought he would see her again. 7 years had passed, and he was in the cafe on his lunch break reading a newspaper when he heard a familiar voice. He looked up. His heart was racing. It was her. Or was it just his imagination? He would recognize her walk anywhere. She always walked with confidence and had a natural twist as her hips gracefully moved across the floor. She was with a young lady who appeared about her age, in her late 20s. They began to embrace and kiss each other publicly with no shame. They could feel his stare and gave him an evil glance. He was invading their privacy. She became excited when she realized it was him.
"Oh my goodness, that's my friend."
She ran excitedly to accompany him at the table as she pulled her girlfriend along to introduce her to him. He could tell she had a hard life. Now that he saw her closely, she looked a lot older. Life had taken its toll on her. She told her friend to give her some time to talk with him. She sat, and they held hands. He reached out and gave her a warm embrace. They held each other for at least 3 minutes and rocked back and forth. He smiled and kissed her on the cheek as tears began to fall down her face.
She spoke softly. "Where have you been? It's been so long since we last spoke. I bet you have a beautiful wife and lovely children."
He put his head down and shook his head. Truthfully, he had never moved on. He still loved her.
"Why, you're so handsome and nice."
He didn't respond, but in his head he questioned, "Why can't you accept my love?" She began to share with him the pain she experienced through the years. She quit college and found there was good money in entertainment.
"Well, I wasn't a star, but..." She paused. "I guess there's no need to lie. I was a table dancer. Then I picked up a bad habit. I began to drink religiously and get high. It was an escape. My habit affected my dancing, so I was fired. I had to survive, so I became a call girl. She paused again. But I'm no longer that person. I have found serenity in nature. I am at one with myself. Nature beckons me and I surrender. I have found the greater power within me, and I realize nothing can ever have control over my life without my will. I don't believe in God. I tried that Christian thing, but it didn't work. I wasn't accepted in their church. It was evident I was not welcome because everyone stared and barely spoke to me. My skirt was too short, but it was all I had. The usher whispered in my ear while I was standing and worshiping that my skirt length was inappropriate and that I needed to go home and change. I left crying and never went back again. I felt God had rejected me. Then, I met her. She told me about her newfound faith. She had gone through the same hurts as me. She understood me. She did not judge me. I realize now that we were meant to be together. She's the best thing that ever happened to me. She laughed. By the way, I went back to school later. I only had one more year of college, and I've just completed my master's degree in counseling psychology. Can you imagine that I'm going to be a professional counselor? I want to lead and guide people to discover peace that goes far beyond spirituality, an appreciation for self and others, and the power of free will and a newfound freedom. She smiled. I know I can make a difference. You see, I was only involved with men because I was looking for a father figure. I never knew my father. I grew up with a mom who went from relationship to relationship. She would often get drunk, and her guy friends took advantage of her vulnerability, forcing themselves on her and me. After I told my teacher about the sexual abuse I was experiencing, I became a ward of the state. I loved my first placement, but the abuse continued. My foster father and I were intimate, so I was removed. I was placed in other homes and the sexual abuse continued. I kept it as a secret because I was tired of moving. I hated myself because I allowed it to happen. And at the same time, I began to enjoy the pleasure it brought. Now I realize that it was not my fault. I'm not completely healed, but opening up has made a difference. I want to take the bad that happened and turn it around for good.
He knew that she was hurting, but he never imagined she had gone through so much pain. He wanted her to meet his father. He knew she would like him if she considered being in a relationship with him. He would not care about her past, and he would love her unconditionally. He began to speak. I'm not like those guys who hurt you. Why didn't you ever give me a chance? What did I ever do to you? He began to weep. All these years I have loved you. I don't ask anything of you, only that you love me back. I long for the day when we will be together. I would take you now if you would only accept my love. My father would approve of you. He is just like me. He's forgiving and doesn't hold grudges. He reached for her hand. She stood to her feet.
Look, I have to go. It was nice seeing you again. I'm in love with someone else. Thanks for the offer, and tell your father I said hi. You should really move on with your life. I hate to see you so sad.
And again, she walked out of his life. He was still sitting on the bench, reflecting, his head in his hands. He heard the sound of the birds. He looked at his watch. It was 7 a.m. He had not heard from her since the day he saw her at the cafe. She called him 2 days ago and asked if he could meet her at the dock around 7:30. She sounded helpless and weak over the phone. He slowly got off his feet, letting out a loud yawn, and began to stretch. As he walked to the pier, he began to pray for her. He felt an urgency to warn her of what awaited her. He had rehearsed over and over again what he would say. She stood at the pier, now in her 30s, but appearing much older. There were bags under her eyes from not resting properly. She was extremely frail and thin. She said she was sick and had thought about him.
I don't want anything. I just wanted to see you. Remember 7 years ago at the cafe, you gave me your business card? I'm surprised you haven't moved or that your home number hasn't changed. Several times I thought about you and your father. I came so close to calling you before, but was persuaded not to. I always remembered, I've always felt loved and peaceful when I'm around you. He gave her a hug. He was glad to see her. Don't worry about me. The doctor said I would be okay. I became depressed and had an eating disorder, but I'm starting to recover. I have a bit of a flu. I know I look horrible.
He replied, "I've missed you," as he extended a hand to her. She said, "I've also missed you." They were both silent. He said, "I need to speak with you. I had a troubling dream about you last night. I don't believe it was a coincidence that you called me. I have been talking to my father about you, and he still wants to meet you." She was confounded.
You mean your father still wants to meet me? She became angry. Why can't you accept that I don't love you? I don't want you. So please, don't desire me.
She began to take large steps back. He wept. "I just want you to experience happiness in your life. Please accept the invitation."
She stepped farther back. For crying out loud, get a life and leave me alone. I just want to be left alone. I'm so tired. My girlfriend died. She began to sob. Everyone I love disappoints me. I have no one, no family. She was all I had. He walked toward her and gave her a deep embrace. She closed her eyes and rested her head upon his shoulder. She felt so safe and secure. He gently stroked her back.
"Come with me. My father waits for your arrival." She weakly held his strong hands and began to walk away with him.
She became frightened. Wait one moment. Stop. I don't know if I can meet your father. Look at me. I look horrible. If he really knew me, he wouldn't love me.
He spoke gently. "I and my father are one. As I love you, so does he."
She began to walk backward. Maybe some other time, but not now, not today. Let me go home and prepare myself.
He spoke. "You are fine just the way you are. My father doesn't require you to change, but just to come as you are."
She began to weep. How can someone love me? I can't go.
He began to look remorseful. "I and my father will not always extend an invitation." She became angry and emotional. She continued to walk backward. She didn't realize that she was near the edge of the dock. One step back, and she would fall into the depths of the sea. He did not want to alarm her. He beckoned for her to come closer. But she cried and shook her head and covered her face.
She cried and whispered, I am nothing to write home about. Why would your father want to meet someone like me?
"You're making a mistake," he screamed. "Please come to me." He held out his arms. "Don't look back. Just come forward before it's too late."
She screamed, Leave me alone and let me be. I'm sorry, but I can't. She took one final step backward and screamed as she fell abruptly into the raging sea.
He fell to his knees and wept bitterly. What should he do? He interceded earnestly on her behalf. He stood and walked to the edge of the pier, but he couldn't see her. He contemplated diving in, but realized that he would die himself trying to rescue her from the strong tide. From a distance, he saw a huge rock. The deep water could not cover it. The waves rushed against the rock, hitting it harshly, but the rock was strong and steady. Was he seeing things? There she was, lying on the rock. She seemed to be resting peacefully. He couldn't tell she wasn't dead. He dared not go in to save her. In his heart, he knew she would be fine. He had been at the pier several times before, but had never noticed the rock. He knew that the miraculous had taken place. She was at a place where she had no choice but to look upward. She was lying on her back, and all she could do was cry out and ask God to have mercy upon her. He looked at her one final time and walked away. It took her almost losing her life to realize that her Heavenly Father loved her enough to protect her from harm and danger. Jesus is our rock. The Lord loves us and is ever merciful and long-suffering, and desires that we recognize His undying love for us. One cannot imagine how much the Father truly loves us. God loves us so much that He sent His Son to die on the cross for our sins. The ultimate price has been paid for us to obtain salvation. Now the choice is ours to accept His love. God's love is steadfast and faithful. It endures during the good times as well as the storms of life. We all search for true love, but all too often we search in the wrong places. There is so much this world has to offer, yet our pursuit for happiness leaves us unsatisfied and desiring something more. We can rest in knowing the Lord is our rock and fortress. There is no circumstance or situation too difficult for God to handle. He is our strength when we are too weak to help ourselves. He is trustworthy when others leave us lonely. His love endures and remains, even when we do not love ourselves. God desires that no man perish. He longs that we all come to the knowledge of who He is. But He will not always plead with us to accept His love. God is beckoning for us to accept Him. When He calls us alone. We cannot expect our friends to walk on this journey with us. It is not wise to take God's love for granted. The day will come when the God of mercy will become a God of judgment. He will judge our sins as well as our rejection of Him. In the story, God had compassion upon the woman. Her sin should have led to destruction, but God's grace allowed her to fall upon a rock of mercy. She is now at a place where her soul has surrendered and is broken before the rock of her salvation. Someone is knocking at your door. Listen closely. Someone is knocking at your door. You may ask who it is and why they are at my door. She heard someone speak, but the voice was real low. Open up and receive my gift. I want to give you more. She walked away from the door and laid on her bed. She thought about all the words that were said. What is this gift? What is the shape and size? She thought until she was tired, and then she closed her eyes. The next morning she heard the same knock. The voice brought conviction, so she told it to stop. She went about her day with deep thoughts on her mind. She concluded it was nothing. It will pass away in time. She went to the mall to shop till she dropped. She heard a knocking sound. Then she turned and stopped. Then she heard the same voice. There seems to be no escape. She hurried away to her car, hoping to get away. A knock on her window turned her head to the left. It was an older lady. She relaxed and caught her breath. She rolled down her window to hear what the lady had to say. The lady looked in her eyes and said, "Jesus is knocking at the door of your heart today." She told her to open up and receive Him. He wants to give you more. Open up your heart. Jesus is calling and knocking at your door. Selah. Look, here I stand at the door and knock. If you hear me calling and open the door, I will come and we shall share a meal as friends. Revelation 3:20. Words of the wise. 3 things are necessary for the salvation of man: to know what he ought to believe, to know what he ought to desire, and to know what he ought to do. St. Thomas Aquinas.